Alright, what's up boys? I'm going to play around with something new and include kind of an update on my own training prior to answering the questions. So, let me know whether this should be separate videos or whether you like this format. Eventually I will start adding those timestamps. I'll get around to it. But moving on, today I went in and I benched. Quarantine right now because everyone in my house has COVID. Hasn't affected my training any, so I'm doing all good. Just got to make sure, I finish my quarantine. That way I can't get in trouble. So back to the gym on Saturday to do some overhead pressing. My pec strength that I've been dealing with has been getting better every week, so gaining some real positive momentum on just about all fronts. On the bench today, I came in. I just kind of worked my way up by triples. I hit 440 for 3, and then 2 triples at 455, all of which moved well, though I could tell that I was kind of using like a bit of a compensatory motor pattern, driving the bar back almost a little bit too early because I didn't have sufficient strength in my triceps, so I had to over rely on my reasonably strong shoulders. So due to that perceived error, I made the call on the day to change my back down work from I switched it from long pause triples to a two board, just focusing on making sure that I'm not using the technique to move the most weight possible on the two boards, but rather the technique that most closely mirrors my regular bench. Toasted my triceps with probably about 20 pounds more than what I was doing my regular work sets at. So triple at 475, nothing good for me. I've done I think 515 for 3 to the two board before, but I could definitely tell that I'm a bit weaker than that, which is probably indicative of what is holding back my bench now that my pec is coming back and I've put so much work into my pec strength. Off the chest power feels phenomenal, so just got to catch the triceps back up and we should be back in business. My basement's too short to train overhead press, so I've been kind of doing a seated jury-rigged version where I lean back against a log while sitting on a bench. It's insanely difficult, much more difficult than seated or standing overhead presses, but hopefully that prepares me. Hopefully it being harder just means that when I go back to regular standing presses on Saturday, I'll be that much stronger, but we'll see. I'm definitely pushing pretty hard because I would like to get to a 350 strict press. That's been something I kind of had my eye on for a bit. Now that I've got some good momentum, my body's feeling pretty healthy. I want to make the push for that, as well as a 550 bench in the next couple blocks. So that's kind of how pressing is going, getting back into the standing soon, both of which are gaining momentum. I had really good momentum on the standing, but then it kind of got derailed by having to train at home and quarantine, but I've always been pretty good about getting my overhead press up whenever I want to. Squats are going well, my knees are getting a little bit better. I know what I have to do to keep them healthy. I've just been pausing all my top sets. Numbers aren't that cool, but hopefully that'll lay down the foundation to do some cool numbers next block. Hoping to just hit like a 655 pause squat, maybe like a 585 pause SSB if I'm feeling really strong. Not outstanding numbers for me, but a good way to end the block and keep some positive momentum. And then deadlifts finally getting the form down. I switched back from sumo to conventional, which with my leverage changes and getting heavier has been a real bitch and a half, but I want to pull 800 for the first time conventional just because of my fragile ego. So that's kind of the plan. It's probably the one that I'm working the hardest on right now, trying to get some good momentum, whereas the other lifts tend to just gain momentum themselves, just given how I'm built. And when I nail my lifestyle factors, I'm sleeping a lot, I'm eating a lot, I'm pushing hard in the gym, those tend to gain momentum a lot easier than my deadlift. So it's kind of where I'm at. I think I've got 2 or 3 more weeks of this block, and then I roll into the real big push next block. I'm going to ramp up the food. We're going to push it pretty hard. Body feels pretty good. We're going to see how it goes. And then getting into the questions. I apologize if you don't care about my training. I totally understand. But just kind of wanted to give a summary for those of you that follow along with my training on Instagram. Just kind of let you guys know where I'm at. The first question is, what is your thinking on Olympic heeled shoes for squat? When should someone use heels? Is there any reason to use them if you have no limits in mobility to reach depth? That's a good question. There's lots of good lifters who use heels even if they could squat to depth without them. That being said, individual variability aside, my catch-all recommendation is that if you can hit good positions in flats, you're probably better off squatting in flats. If you can't hit good positions in flats and you can't seem to remedy the issue, that's where heels come into play. Or if your good positions are fine, but the depth is dicey in flats, that's another chance where heels might be useful, especially if you're a bigger athlete. That might be necessary to get really convincing depth. That's something I found for myself is while I can do a nice looking squat in flats, given my legs getting bigger, my gut getting bigger, and the fact that I'm a pretty short-limbed dude, my depth is only really convincing if I do it in heels. So I'd say that would be my thought process. The second question is, when writing a hypertrophy block for an intermediate lifter, how would you include some strength work in? I was thinking of doing a top set of 2 to 5 reps at a relatively low RPE and then dropping weight and doing sets of 8 to 10 for the remaining sets. Would it make more sense to train hypertrophy and strength on separate days, or is my approach all right? So I would recommend that you follow, what's it called, Data-Driven Strength. The two guys who run that on Instagram, they post a lot of fun little infographics that are evidence-based, but they also provide a lot of practicable knowledge of just like what that would look like in a program. And yeah, that's exactly the role of what a top set would do. I think that you could either do like a more of a daily undulating approach and have a strength day and a hypertrophy day, or if you really want to bump the frequency on training your hypertrophy and your strength, having a dual purpose day is absolutely okay. You just want to make sure that you keep the goal, right? So when we're in a hypertrophy phase, our primary goal is hypertrophy. When we're in a strength phase, our primary goal is strength, right? So that being said, we don't want to do so much on that top set that it's really detracting from the quality of those hypertrophy sets. So what that looks like, yeah, it could be a top set of 2 to 5 reps. It could be a top single at a moderate to low RPE, as a lot of people do. It has become popular nowadays. Either works. There's nothing wrong with your approach. I think that the best thing to do would be to try it, kind of report back. You say, okay, this isn't taking away from the quality of my hypertrophy sets, or it is. Maybe a single would be better because it might actually be less taxing once you acclimate to it, rather than like, even a set of 5 at a 7 is kind of difficult, whereas a single at a 7 might be relatively less taxing for you, depending on what you're conditioned to and your technique. So I think that it comes down to the fact that there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and all of those are perfectly valid ways to structure strength training within a hypertrophy block. Top sets, maintaining that upper end skill. I guess it kind of comes down to what you're trying to build as well. Are you trying to take a concurrent approach and develop strength qualities at the same time as hypertrophy qualities, in which case like working in like the 3 to 5 range might be very valid, or are you just trying to maintain like your upper end like neural efficiency and technical skill, in which case a single might be more appropriate. That being said, they're all perfectly valid ways to kind of dual purpose a day. The next question is, best thing to do when resting in between sets? Would sitting down between sets be better rather than standing? Does it really matter? Should we still perform the same? Okay, so I'm going to tell you that to some degree it doesn't matter, right? Like, it doesn't matter that much. You're not going to suddenly get much stronger if you practice good habits between sets. But that being said, I think that's a big difference between lifters who make really good progress and just kind of intuitively get things, and lifters who make poor progress. They often blame it on their genetics, but there's just like so many differences. If you were a fly on the wall observing their training, you'd see super low intensity, you'd see distraction between sets. So that being said, what would I tell you to do? I like to sit down. I'm fat, I like to conserve my energy a little bit, but I think that, staying off your phone. I'm sure you've heard that a billion times. I'm sure you should, and I'm sure you're on your phone. That's okay. But that being said, I think that if you really want to spend that rest time as appropriately as possible, the best thing you could possibly do is sit there, catch your breath, imagine that next set going perfectly. Imagine what you want that next set to look like. Kind of imagine your cues in your head. Kind of imagine flexing your muscles and like relative to the cues. Imagine getting your back tight. If you do that between every set, for a whole block, the difference in the rate of progress and the difference of quality of sets you'll see is insane, right? And the problem is that it sounds corny, so people don't do it, or people just get lazy and forget to do it. But I'd say that's the most important thing is, just catching your breath and then visualizing. You want to rest long enough that the quality of the work doesn't go down, but there's definitely better and worse uses of time between sets. Other things I like to do is, whether it's helpful or not, is like I'll do some like activation work. I'll grab a band if I feel like I'm doing a poor job depressing my scaps. I'll do some pullovers, just kind of get a little bit of extra blood to the muscle associated with what I need to execute better. Just kind of a proprioceptive thing allows me do my cues a little better. So maybe activation, maybe a little mobility. If that's like, you can address issues, like low scale issues, as long as what you're doing to address it is a short-term thing and it isn't going to tire you out. If you find that, oh yeah, my ankles are feeling like shit between your sets, you should be working on that. If you feel like, oh yeah, I'm not getting my back tight between your sets, you should be working on that in addition to the visualization thing. And that can make a huge difference in what you get out of like a 5x5. If between every set you're taking steps to make the last set, the next set better than the last set. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I think that's important information. Do you believe energy drinks or pre-workout should be avoided, as Stan Efferding suggests to avoid? I only have them when it's time to break a PR, but other than that, I just drink Gatorade through my training sesh. Just factoring in things like water, food intake, hours of sleep, that's more important. Okay, yeah, so water, food intake, hours of sleep, those are much more important, but caffeine is proven to be a PED. It's very well researched, it's very well tolerated. So what I would say, more so than anything else, is I wouldn't have caffeine as an intra-workout. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me, but if you find that caffeine as a pre-workout supplement significantly increases the quality of your training and does not significantly decrease the quality of your sleep, I think that would be very worthwhile. You know, if something allows you to train harder and it doesn't have a negative for you, that seems like something that would be very worthwhile. It's one of the few supplements that's super well researched to aid in strength training performance outside of like creatine, and I'd say it's very worthwhile in that case. If you find it's negatively impacting your sleep, I would maybe play around with a lower dose, and if it's still negatively impacting your sleep, that's probably a net negative, and I would stay away from it. As far as you mentioned Gatorade, I think that intra-workout calories certainly have a place. You're going to want a relatively quick digesting carb like dextrose, which Gatorade has in it. That's one thing that people don't really think about, is Powerade or like other cheaper versions of Gatorade don't have dextrose, which is basically just a faster digesting carb than what you would otherwise have from like high fructose corn syrup. So yeah, I think that's totally okay as long as you're fitting it into your total macros, especially if your training sessions are a little bit longer. It's not necessary by any means if you're having a pre and post workout meal with some carbs. It shouldn't matter, but especially if your training sessions are a little bit longer, that's a perfectly good practice. Yeah, that would be my answer. And then the last one is, how long are your hypertrophy blocks typically, and how long do you like to progress them on a weekly basis? And how do you like to progress them? How do you decide if you want to add more weight, more reps, more sets onto the next week? Do you start with a lower RPE and then progress closer to failure as the block comes closer to an end, or do something different? Okay, so I'm assuming you're asking more generally, not specifically what I do. So as far as the block length, mine are 4 weeks. A lot of the guys I coach are 3 weeks. A couple of them are 4 weeks. I think that's one of those things that there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, right? And like some people will do like 1-1-1, almost breaking it into these like medium between micro and mesocycles, where you just hit 1 week of each. Mike T has a really good podcast with the data-driven strength guys about why is there this notion that like a hypertrophy phase has to be a certain length of time to be beneficial, because it'll take 6 weeks to have any meaningful hypertrophy. Well, what is meaningful hypertrophy? Meaningful hypertrophy is anything that's going to be able to carry over to our upper end strength. So just about any lean tissue gain is going to be meaningful. So there's no reason you have to spend a ton of time in a hypertrophy phase. The reason I like doing consecutive weeks in a hypertrophy phase is because I find when you first enter a hypertrophy phase initially, what you're limited by is work capacity, not muscular capacity. So obviously that's kind of holding back the potential progress we can make. So I like to have some period of time where the lifter can acclimate to the workload so that we are reaching muscular failure rather than their lungs failing. But I think it's one of those things, as a lifter gets more advanced, you probably have to spend a little bit more time in each block. If you're new to the gym, you can do the same workout every week and progress, right? And then if you were just a little bit more advanced, you could have an A week and a B week, right? You have 8s 1 week, 5s, 8s, 5s, and you could progress every single time you do them. And you get a little bit more advanced, you can't add weight every other week, right? And then maybe you have 3 phases. You have 8-5-3, 8-5-3, 8-5-3, and you can add every single time, right? And as you get more advanced, you can't do that. And maybe you need 2 8s, 2 5s, 2 3s, so on and so forth. And that's the amount of time you have to spend in a given phase to reach new all-time highs probably will increase as we get more advanced, right? So you know, if you could think about it as you're expanding out the training block as necessary based on the amount of time you need to become better than you were in the past in a given phase, right? So for myself, I probably need about 4 or 5 weeks to chip what the best I've been for, let's say, sets of 8. So yeah, I will start relatively on the lower ends of 8s. I'll hit more sets, kind of taper the volume just a little bit, increase the intensity through, and just try to end with some all-time total volume PRs. Tons of way to track it. Don't really have time to go into all of them, and I would like a whiteboard to do that, but there's tons of ways to kind of, you know, track and make sure that we're hitting all-time volume PRs by the end of a hypertrophy phase. But what I would say is, like, yeah, you kind of want to, you can fix your sets or you can drop like a couple of sets, and you want to ramp up that RPE across the phase. I know that Chad Wesley Smith likes adding in sets. I don't find that viable alongside the increases in intensity, so I would rather fix the total volume and ramp up the intensity in the given rep range. So, right, so, you know, if you want something really simple, you start with like 4 sets 8 at 6, 4 sets 8 at 7, 4 sets 8 at 9, right? That is a 3-week really solid hypertrophy phase. If you push yourself, let's just say you follow that rep scheme twice a week, that's 6 sessions, you'll probably gain a reasonable little bit of lean tissue, and it'll put you in a very good spot to phase potentiate for a strength block following. So yeah, answers weren't great today, a little bit long-winded. I like to think that there's no blood in my head yet, you know, it's all in the guns. But let me know whether you guys would like to hear my training updates at the beginning of these in separate videos or not at all. I am not offended in the slightest.